Okay, so be honest.
Yeah.
Who here has, actually screamed at their phone? Literally screamed because you ask for one thing and it gives you something completely random.
Oh, all the time. It's the universal experience, isn't it?
You ask for a podcast, it calls your dentist. You ask for the weather in Paris, you get a web search for plaster of Paris.
Right. There's a reason people have been calling these things artificial idiots for years. The promise was always Jarvis from Iron Man, but what we got was basically a fancy egg timer.
Exactly. The artificial idiot.
Yeah.
And honestly, we are all just tired of the promises. But if the reports that dropped today, January 21st, 2026, are on the money, that whole era of frustration might be ending. But it's ending in a way I don't think anyone saw coming, not even the most cynical Apple analysts. So today, we're doing a deep dive into what looks like the biggest pivot in Apple's history since the iPhone itself.
It's massive. And pivot might be too soft a word. This is a complete reset. We're not talking about a simple software update, another iOS version. We're talking about a total philosophical overhaul. We've got reports detailing a new chatbot, a deep reliance on a rival that would have been unthinkable a few years ago.
And a piece of hardware for 2027 that sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It really does. They're trying to turn sci-fi into a mass market product.
So here's our mission for this deep dive. We've got a pile of sources, Bloomberg reports, leaked developer documents, supply chain memos. We need to figure out how Apple plans to go from the, let's be honest, disastrous Apple Intelligence launch of 2024 to actually trying to dominate the AI market in 2026.
And we have to talk about the cost, not the financial cost, but the privacy cost.
Which is the huge elephant in the room.
Or maybe the elephant in the server farm, given where all this data is heading.
Right. So let's start with what's coming first. The code name is Campos. This is the software that's meant to save Siri.
Essentially, yes. Campos is the internal name for the new AI chatbot that's shipping with iOS 27, iPadOS 27, which is called Rave, inside Apple and macOS 27, codenamed Fizz.
Right.
And the key thing to understand is that while the name Siri is staying, the engine underneath is brand new, completely new.
So when I hold the side button, I'm not talking to the same old code. This isn't just a bigger vocabulary.
No, not at all. You're talking to a full large language model, an LLM. It's truly conversational. It's no longer just a command line. It's a bot you can compare to, GPT-5 or Google's Gemini Ultra.
But we have chat apps. The real news here isn't just that it can chat, right?
No, the killer app, the thing that makes this different is that this new Siri has eyes.
Eyes as in it can see my screen. Screen awareness.
Exactly. This is the thing third-party apps could never do because of Apple's security sandbox. This new Siri, it analyzes what's on your screen at the system level. The pixels, the metadata, everything you're looking at in that moment.
Okay, let's make that real for people. Because screen awareness sounds a little bit like marketing talk or, frankly, spyware. How does this actually help me on a Tuesday morning?
Okay, think about the friction now. You're looking at a calendar invite, right? And you need to email a coworker about it. So now you have to open the calendar, memorize the time, switch apps, open your email, start typing. Then you realize you forgot the location, so you switch back.
It's the toggle tax. I do that 100 times a day, and half the time I send the email with the wrong date anyway.
Exactly. With Campos, you just look at the calendar invite and say, write an email to Sarah about this meeting and ask if we can push it back 30 minutes.
And it just does it.
It sees the invite, it pulls the context date, time, who's involved, it drafts the email, and it just shows it to you. One step.
That is the promise of AI agents we've been hearing about forever. But the integration is deeper than just mail and calendars from what I saw.
Yeah.
Something about Xcode.
Oh yeah, that's where it gets really powerful for professional users. It integrates into Xcode for coding, into Final Cut, Logic Pro, the OS itself. You can apparently tell it, crop this photo and color grade it to look like that one I took yesterday.
Wow.
And it does that whole chain of commands. It understands yesterday, finds the photo, and applies the settings.
Okay, so this brings me to something a little sad for us longtime Mac users. The reports suggest this could be the end of Spotlight.
It's looking that way. Spotlight's been our go-to command space search for, 20 years?
Yeah.
But Apple seems to be thinking that search itself is an old idea. You shouldn't have to search for a file by name. You should just ask your computer to find that project I was working on last week.
So it's retrieval, not search.
Exactly. It's a much deeper level of retrieval. It's not looking for file name. It's looking for the concept inside the file.
Right.
It's semantic. It can connect a PDF you downloaded with an email you sent and a note you wrote and just give them to you as a complete package.
That sounds amazing, but let me play skeptic for a second. Apple has promised a better Siri every single June for a decade, and it always falls short on the complex stuff.
Yeah.
Why is this time different? I mean, the kind of compute power you'd need to do what you just described it's massive.
And that right there is where the whole story twists. The reason this time is different is because Apple has finally admitted it can't do it alone.
The frenemy dynamic.
You're leaning on Google heavily.
I want to pause on that because that feels like a fundamental shift in Silicon Valley politics. I mean, we know about the search deal, Google paying billions to be the default, but this is different. This is Apple basically outsourcing the brain of its operating system.
It is. The reports say the new Siri runs on something called Apple Foundation Models version 11. But under the hood, sources are all saying that's just a wrapper. It's actually a high-end, custom version of Google's Gemini technology.
So the Apple model is just Google wearing an Apple mask.
Pretty much. Think of it as being on the level of a Gemini 3 model. And here's the technical reality that explains why they had to do it. You know how Apple loves to talk about on-device processing, privacy, the neural engine, all that?
Of course. What happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone. It's been their core marketing for a decade.
Well, the laws of physics kind of got in the way. The neural engine is great for small stuff like Face ID, but a model that can understand your screen, write code, and summarize documents all at once, that takes a level of power that a phone battery just can't handle yet.
So they have to go to the cloud.
They have to. And it seems Apple's own server setup, that private cloud compute thing, it just wasn't scaling fast enough. So the really heavy lifting for this new Siri is happening directly on servers running Google's TPU chips.
TPUs, tensor processing units, Google's own custom AI chips.
That's right. So Apple is renting Google's hardware to run Google's software, all wrapped up in an Apple interface.
That is, wow. For a company that prides itself on owning the whole widget, silicon to software, to pay its biggest rival $1 billion a year just to make its assistant work, that just screams desperation.
Or pragmatism. They knew they were years behind. They could spend 5 more years trying to catch up, or they could pay Google to skip the line. But they built in a safety valve. The whole architecture is modular.
Modular, so they can swap the engine out later.
Exactly. The Siri interface is separate from the underlying model. Right now, the brain is Google because it's the best option. But if Apple's own models get good enough in 2028, or if, say, OpenAI offers a better deal, they can just swap out the backend. You, as the user, won't notice anything except maybe the answers get better.
It buys them time. But speaking of time, and my data, this brings up a huge problem. If I'm chatting with a bot that's running on Google's servers, and that bot is seeing my screen, what on earth happened to privacy?
This is the billion-dollar question, and it leads to what the engineers are reportedly calling the memory problem.
The memory problem. Okay, break that down.
So, you know how if you use ChatGPT or Gemini now, they have a memory? You tell it once, I have a peanut allergy, and it remembers that for weeks. That context is what makes it so useful.
Right, so you're not starting from scratch with your life story every single time.
Exactly. But for Apple, that memory is a huge liability. If that data lives on a server, especially a Google server, Apple's whole claim to absolute privacy just evaporates.
So they're trapped. If they wipe the memory to protect privacy, the AI is stupid. If they keep the memory to make it useful, privacy is compromised.
That's it. And the reports say there's a huge internal battle going on at Apple right now. One side wants to seriously limit how much it remembers, basically give Siri amnesia every 24 hours. The other side is saying if you do that, it won't be helpful and no one will use it.
It's the goldfish versus elephant debate. A goldfish is private because it forgets everything. An elephant is useful because it remembers. You can't have a private elephant.
That's a perfect way to put it. And how they solve that problem before launch is going to decide if this thing is a huge hit or a privacy disaster.
It feels like the whole on-device purity test is basically dead. We're in a hybrid world now. But the leaks went beyond just software. There was another, even crazier report about what's coming in 2027.
Yes, the hardware pivot.
The AI pin. And I have to admit, when I first saw that, I just groaned. I mean, we all saw the Humane AI pin launch and then just completely crash and burn. We saw the Rabbit R1 become a paperweight.
Yeah.
The batteries were awful. They were slow. Nobody wanted a laser on their hand. Why would Apple even touch this idea?
Because that's the classic Apple playbook, right? They almost never go first. They let other companies fail, they figure out why they failed, and then they try to perfect the idea. Apple seems to think the idea wasn't the problem, the execution was.
So what does Apple's version look like? Is it a big brooch?
Think about the size of an AirTag, just a bit thicker, circular, made of aluminum and glass. And it uses the same magnetic charging puck as the Apple Watch, so you can snap it onto a battery pack inside your shirt.
Okay, a magnetic attachment. And please, tell me there are no lasers.
No lasers. That was a total gimmick. This is all about input. It has one physical button, 3 microphones for clear audio, and a speaker. But the most important parts are the cameras, a standard and a wide angle.
So it clips to my shirt, and it just sees what I see all day.
They're calling it passive capture. It's meant to be an always-on set of eyes for your AI. And unlike the startups who made maybe 50,000 of these, Apple is apparently planning a production run of 20 million units.
30 million. That is not an experiment. That's a full-blown product launch. Those are iPad numbers.
It's incredibly aggressive, but I don't think you can look at the Pin as a standalone device. You have to see it as a bridge.
A bridge to what?
To the Apple Glass project. The reports all say that AR glasses are still the ultimate goal, maybe for late 2027, early 2028. But glasses are really hard to get right. Batteries, weight, social acceptance. A Pin is much easier. It gets people used to the idea of ambient computing, of talking to an AI that sees your world without making them put something on their face just yet.
It also solves a huge data problem for them. If Apple wants to train its own AI models and get off Google servers, they need real-world first-person video. 20 million people wearing cameras is a heck of a way to build that data set.
It's a massive data vacuum, and it fits with everything else they're doing. The report also mentioned new AirPods coming with built-in cameras.
Wait, cameras on AirPods? How would that even work? That sounds so intrusive.
It sounds like sci-fi, I know. But it's for spatial awareness. If you have cameras on your ears and a camera on your chest, the AI gets a complete 3D picture of your surroundings. It can say, you left your keys on the counter to your left because the AirPods saw the counter and the Pin saw the keys.
So the bet is that the next big thing isn't a better screen. It's no screen at all.
Ambient computing, that's the goal. Joni Ive is reportedly working on something similar with Sam Altman. Apple knows that if the world moves to just talking to the air, the iPhone suddenly becomes a lot less important. They need to own the thing that's doing the listening and the watching.
That explains the urgency. They're not just fighting Samsung anymore. They're fighting a whole paradigm shift. And a pivot, this big partnering with Google, killing Spotlight, building this new hardware, it had to require a shakeup at the top.
Oh, absolutely. The personnel changes are the real tell that this was a crisis response. John Gianandrea, who was the AI chief for years, he stepped down in December 2025.
He was the guy they brought over from Google years ago to fix Siri the first time.
And look, the whole underwhelming Apple Intelligence launch in 2024, that happened on his watch. It was too safe. It was too slow. So now Craig Federighi, Air Force One, he's taken over everything. He runs all of software engineering now.
But Craig's a software guy, not an AI research guy. He's the one who demos the new iOS features.
Exactly. Which is why the most telling hire is Amar Subramanya. He's the new VP of AI. And guess where he just came from?
Let me take a wild guess. The company they're renting all the servers from.
Google. He was one of the engineering leads on Gemini.
It all connects. They hired the Gemini engineer, they licensed the Gemini model, and they run it on Google hardware. This is a full-on embrace of Google to save Apple.
It is. And it's a huge philosophical reversal for Craig Federighi, too.
Yeah.
Do you remember back at WWDC 2024? He was so dismissive of chatbots. He said Apple didn't want to force people into a chat experience. He wanted the AI to be invisible.
I remember. Integrated, not chatty. That was the line.
Well, the market voted. And users want chat. They want to ask direct questions. The failure of that invisible AI forced their hand. Now the chatbot is the main interface.
It's a big slice of humble pie, admitting you got the entire paradigm wrong. But the market seems to love the humility. I saw Apple stock jumped almost 2% on the news.
Investors love a team up. They love seeing Apple stop trying to reinvent the wheel and just buy the best one off the shelf. It shows that profit is coming before pride.
So let's wrap this all up. We are on the verge of a massive reset. 2026 is the year of the Google-fied Siri.
Project Campos. Finally, maybe, fixing the frustration of the last decade.
And then 2027 is the year of the big gamble. The AI pin. Trying to get computing off our screens and onto our clothes.
It's an exciting plan, but I just can't stop thinking about that memory problem.
That's the takeaway for me, too. The artificial idiot era might finally be over. But the price of admission is our data. We're going from a world where privacy meant your data was encrypted on your device to a world where privacy just means trusting Apple's contract with Google.
And trusting a camera on your chest.
Which brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with. If Apple releases a device in 2027 that sees everything you see, your kids, your home, your work, and that data is processed by an AI that needs to know you to be useful, is the Apple privacy brand even compatible with the AI era? Or are we just admitting that the age of private computing is over and we're all just renting convenience with our own surveillance?
That is the question. We'll be watching very closely come WWDC in June to see how they try to answer it.
Thanks for diving in with us.
My pleasure.